Okay, so part of this class will be doing some a lecture here, and then after which we'll be doing some sort of demonstration on how we can do this, or how for you to see how do these actual codes work with our studio. So again, for this morning class, we'll be talking on working with files. So typically class will be talking on how we can enter our data to R, or how we can import a CSV file, and how we can export a data set to a CSV file format, and then how we can explore, or how we can change our current working directory. So when we say class working directory, we are referring here to the folder. So which folder are you currently using? So once we start opening class our studio, it has a folder for which which is already in use. And from this folder, we can we can put there our data set so that we can readily access these files. But then there's also a way. If our file is not stored in that location, we can further create a CSV file for that, and then import this file later in our studio. Again, here are the learning objectives for this lesson. You should be able, class, to create a small data set in R by typing directly from the console. So there are two ways, class, in which we can enter our data to R. Either we will encode our data in Excel file, and then from the Excel file, we are going to save it as CSV file format. So CSV, class, that stands for comma separated value. So mean to say, class, the data or each column is separated by a comma. So hence we call that one as comma separated value as CSV file format. So CSV, class, it provides a more flexibility towards accessing your file, because we could assume, class, that not all computers have Microsoft Excel that we can work on. So if we transfer, class, our data to other computer which doesn't have Microsoft Excel installed into it, so we cannot read these files. But then if we store, class, our data set as CSV file format, it is easier for us to open these files even though we don't have, class, the Microsoft Excel installed into our computer. It can be open, class, with a notepad. And I guess, class, notepad is very readable, or a notepad, class, is very common application to Windows OS. So we don't need to install a notepad because it is already part of the operating system. It comes preloaded with Windows operating system. So with that, but somehow, class, it is also important that we will know how we can directly enter our data set in R. For example, class, like for example, in your case, okay, if you don't have with you a computer at home, so you cannot import your files or your CSV file to R for you to work on. So you need to enter this data to some applications like the one which I have shared to you, where you can run online R codes. So with that, you need to enter this data manually, okay, to the console. And then from here, I'll be discussing also, class, on how we can import a CSV file. And at the same time, we will learn, class, how we can export some data sets using R. In particular, class, will be exporting our data set to a comma separated file format, since it is very portable and CSV file format. So how do we enter data in R? So for example, class, we have this data. So normally, our data, class, looks like a table. It has columns and it has rows. Okay. So for example, we have this data, grade level, the section, number of male, and number of females. Okay. This is just a very short data that we have. And then, for example, class, you were tasked to enter this data to R by using the console. Okay? So, applying class, what we have learned in the first quarter, diba? We learned class about vectors, we learned class about objects, and then we also learned class about data frames. Okay? So, from here, class, what we can do, as we have learned class, an object, or yes, an object class contains only a single value. Once an object class contains two or more value, we call that one as vector. And then group of vectors, we have here your data frame. So what we can do here, class, is that for each of these columns, we are going to create a separate vector for each column. Okay? From each column, we will assign a vector name to hold these values. And then with the vectors class being created, we are going to combine all these vectors to create class our data set, or what shall we say, class, to create our data frame. So that's what we are going to do in this slide presentation. We are going to create class again. We are going to create a vector for each of these columns, and then after creating all these vectors, we are going to combine these vectors into one data frame. Okay? So we have here, class, I have here some codes presented. Okay? Okay, for example, this one. So again, as I have mentioned earlier, we are going to create a separate vector for each of these columns. Like for example, for the grade level column, you have here, class, your grade level vector, and then to combine these values, we are going to use your C function. So we have discussed the C function in the first quarter. C is just a short for concatenation. So mean to say, class, when we use this function, what it will do is that it will combine these values as one vector. Hence, by creating class this vector, we assign it to the vector name of grade level. And then take note, class, that if the value of your vector is numeric, there's no need, class, to add double quotation marks. But then, class, if it contains alphanumeric or characters, you should enclose that one in a double quotation marks. Again, take note, class, that we have here all these values, 7, 7, 8, and then 8. And then for the other column, we have here the section column. We also created, class, a new vector to hold the values for our section column. We have here the Marigold, Rizal, Atis, and Chico. And then for the third column, we have here the number of male for each section. We have here 17, 17, 21, and 19. And then finally, for the number of female for each section, we have here this vector. Female, 31, 31, 26, and 27. So again, class, for every column in your data set, you should assign it a vector. Just like what I have presented to you, that each of these columns contains their own specific vectors. And then after that one, class, after we have created these vectors for each of the columns that we have, what we're going to do next is to combine these vectors as one data frame. So there's one thing, class, which I would like to note on you. Make sure, class, that all your vectors have the same length. So what I mean, class, is that if your grade level vector has 4 values, it must also follow that the rest of the vectors that you are going to create also contains 4 values so that they have the same length. Because, class, if you don't have the same length, you cannot combine these vectors together. Again, class, make sure that all your vectors have the same length so that you can easily combine them once we combine them as a single data frame. So questions so far, class, or clarifications?
No, excuse me, sir.
Okay, sorry. Okay, let me share. Okay. Let's stop sharing, right? Okay. So I hope you can see now. Okay, sorry for the earlier. So I don't know why it stopped sharing. Okay, so again, for each of these for each of these columns, we created class vectors to hold its value. That's why we have here class these vectors: grade level, section, male, and female. These were taken class from the column names of our data set. Pero take note class that in our grade level, it contains a space. Okay? And take note class that in naming our vectors, it should not contain spaces. So therefore, we can add either underscore or period or a character, which depends on your preference. Just make sure na wala siya spaces, because if it contains class spaces, it will create an error. Okay, so far class, questions or clarifications? Nakasunod ra about how do we transform a table into vectors? Okay, so from here class, so again, after creating the vectors class for your table, we can now combine them. Okay, we can combine these vectors as one data frame using this function, the data.frame function. Okay, so again class, this function is used to combine all your vectors as one data set or as one data frame. So we have here, comes first is your grade level, and then followed class by your section. So grade level here, section, then number of male, and then we have here the number of female. So the way you arrange class your vectors and inside your data.frame function, it is also the same way when it will be presented into your R console when you try to view them. So for example class, we created here a data frame name of student population. And our student population class data frame, it contains the value of the grade level vector, section, number of male, as well as the number of female joined together by the using this data.frame function. Then your data.frame function class, it tries to combine all these values into one data frame. So hence class, if you want to display the contents of your data frame which you have created earlier, you just have to type class its dataset name. For example, we have here your student population, and once class you press enter, you can see this output. So this is the same way in this table that we have created. So from the table, again, we transform our table into a set of vectors, and then from this set of vectors, we combine them into one data frame or into one data set by using this data.frame function. So questions so far class or clarifications? Other questions? Okay, so I hope class that's clear. Again, when you are given class a table, and then you were tasked to encode that one in R, so transform all these columns into separate vector, and then from the vectors, you are going to combine them using the data.frame function. And that should create a data set in R. Okay, so aside class from directly encoding your data set to your R console, you can also use a CSV file. Again, your CSV file class, it's a comma separated value file. So mean to say, your values here are separated with a comma. So instead of having columns, what we have here are commas. Okay? For example, we have here your column name, is one, and then they are separated class with a comma. So hence we call that one as comma separated value. So when encoding class, so I would recommend that you will use Microsoft Excel to encode this data so that it will be a lot more easier for you to code your data. And then from your Excel file, you can save it as CSV. Once it is now a CSV file format, you can import this CSV file to our studio for further data analysis. So that's what we're going to do this time. We are going to write a code so that we can import this CSV file to our studio. So to do this, we are going to use class your read.csv function. So again, we have class this read.csv function. So what this function will do is that it will try to read class this file, okay, located in this location. So mean to say class, when you use this function, you need to supply the actual location of your file. So when you say where do this file resides, so you have to type class the entire location of your file and then place it inside your read.csv function. So again, mean to say your read.csv function class will read the file as a CSV file format. And then after reading, what we do is that we assign all these values obtained inside this file will be stored to this object. It will be stored to student pop object or student pop data frame, since this is a data set. And then when you want to display class its content, you will just have to call class the dataset name. Like for example, we created here a dataset name of student pop, wherein its value is derived from reading the file in this location, which is in particular our student population.csv. And then after reading, it will assign all these values into this variable or into this object, the student pop object. And then if you want the class to display what are those variables or what are those contents which your student pop variable holds, you will just have to type its name. And then after pressing enter, you can see this data. So these are data taken from this CSV file that we have. So questions so far, class, or clarifications about how we can import a CSV file to our RStudio? Okay, so class, questions so far or clarifications? So again, later I'll be showing you class on how we can use these functions. Okay, so we proceed. So if there's a way, class, for us to import a data, when you say class import, mean to say the CSV file is going to R for further data analysis. Then when you say export, the data from R will be saved or will be stored into your computer's hard disk. So you are going to store your data into your computer's hard disk. So that's what we're going to do when we export a data set. So in importing, we use class your read.csv function. When we try to export a data set, we will be using class the write.csv. Again, when we import, we use class your read.csv function. Whereas when we export a data set, we will make use class of the function write.csv. So mean to say write.csv, it will particularly class, it will store the data set that you have selected into your computer's hard drive or in your computer's hard disk. If your read.csv function class takes only one argument, which is the location of your data set, like this one, it only contains one argument, which is the actual file location. Your write.csv function takes two arguments. And what are these arguments? Okay, so by the way, class, these entries here inside our function, we call that one as arguments. Okay, class, we call that one as arguments. Okay, so in the write.csv function, it takes two arguments, namely your dataset name. So it's the actual dataset class that you wanted to export. And then the other argument is the actual location of the file together class with the file name. Okay, this is your location class. It will be stored to your desktop. And then the file or the file name is this one, checkwait.csv. So this is your actual file name. So you need to supply class two arguments when you use class your write.csv function. Firstly is again the name of the data set that you want to export, and then second is the actual file location as well as the file name of the data set that you want to export. So that's how you can export class a data set using write.csv function. Questions so far, class, or clarifications if there are? Again, so later I'll be showing you class on how we can execute these commands and how we can actually perform these things. Then I guess this will be the last topic. It's all about how we can explore directories in R. So before exporting and importing class CSV, it is also important that we know which folder are we currently working on. Okay, so this is done class by using this function, getWD. So getWD class is just like displaying your or get working directory. So when we say class working directory, it's the actual folder for which you are using. So when you try class to run the RStudio, it has a specific folder in your computer for which it is being used while executing this RStudio. So for my case, and if you are not so sure class which folder are you currently working on, you can issue this command, getWD. And after pressing enter, what it will do is that it will display the file or the file location that you are currently using. So if you can see here, you are under documents folder. So if you try to take a look in your documents folder, I mean to say that's where your RStudio is using. So from the documents folder, you can store here your CSV file for easy retrieval. Or pwede na put class later that you can import a CSV file using read.csv function and supply with the actual file location. And then, for example, class, again, your getWD, it will only display class your current working directory. So I mean to say again, which folder are you currently using while running your RStudio? So that is what we meant by getWD. And then the other function we have is the setWD. So if your getWD class retrieves your current working directory, your setWD function, it will try class to change. You can change your current working directory by using the setWD function. So to do this, you will just have class to supply the actual file location which you want to use. For example, from the documents folder, okay, so currently we are under on documents folder. And then if you wanted class to change from documents folder, going to desktop folder, you can issue this command, setWD, and then in double quotation marks, and then the file location that we have. So C users unknown, then desktop, and then with, of course, your double quotation marks. So when you try to press enter, mean to say class, you have set your working directory to your desktop folder. And then when you issue this command, get wd, you could see that your current working directory is now on desktop folder. So that's how you can display class your current working directory, and at the same time, how you can set your working directory. So why am I introducing you these cases, like setting and getting your working directory? Because class, for example, if you know your working directory, as I have mentioned earlier, you can place your CSV file in your current working directory and use your read.csv function and then supply directly your file or supply your file name of your CSV file format. So there's no need for us to specify the entire file location. Diba, in our previous example, this one, we supply class the actual file location. So from the hard disk going to the file name. But then class, if you have your CSV file stored into your working directory, you can just directly type the file name. So for example, since we are now on desktop folder, so I can just say here student population.csv. So there's no need to specify this actual location because this is my current working directory. And every file class located in our working directory is accessible to R. So if we use class this read.csv function and then pass the student population.csv, it can directly read this file because it is in its current working directory. So that's how we can directly import a CSV file using the read.csv function and then supply the file name. Pero class, again, if your file doesn't reside in your working directory, so you need to specify the actual file location. And then the same is true with write.csv. Again, your write.csv function takes two arguments. First one is your data set that you want to export, and then the second one is the location and the file name which you want your data set to be exported. So in this case, if you just say pyromycin.csv, when you press enter class, this CSV file will be stored into your current working directory because wala ka nag-specify of actual na file location. Instead, you just supply the file name. So if that's the case, this file again will be stored into your current working directory. So that's how we can import and export and setting class and getting your working directory. Do you have questions, class, or clarifications so far? Last other questions? Okay, so if there's none, so maybe I can stop the recording now.